I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Welcome to the Vietnam Veterans News Podcast. News of interest about Vietnam veterans from a Vietnam veteran. Now, here's your host, Mac Payne.
This is Mac Payne here with episode 1716 of the Vietnam Veteran News Podcast. News about the Vietnam War and the brave veterans who served there, as told to you by yours truly, a Vietnam veteran. As we all know, on this day, in April of 2020, the whole world is dealing with the pandemic caused by coronavirus. Some are doing better than others. Believe it or not, there's one country that's doing an outstanding job dealing with the virus. That just happens to be a country many Vietnam veterans are familiar with. That's right, Vietnam. Back in episode 169 or 8 of this podcast, I talked about what they were doing to minimize the threat to their country. In this episode, I'm going to give you an update on it because they're continuing to do well. Looks like they're leading the world. Again, these little guys over there just fill me with admiration. They're tough, they're friendly, they're resourceful. They took on and dealt with 3 major world powers. First the French, then the United States, then China. They're becoming a world power in economics. I was so impressed with the Vietnamese people when I was there, and I'm still impressed with them. They are a wonderful bunch of people. They're friendly, hardworking, resourceful. And if any country needs a good, reliable ally when they face problems, you could do a whole lot worse than Vietnam. That's why I'm going to share a story with you that appeared on the Daily Sabah website, comes from the German press agency, DPA. Title of the story is, "With no deaths reported." Did you get that? No deaths reported. Vietnam's response to coronavirus pandemic earns praise. I'll definitely second that. I'll give them praise all day for what they're doing. Another reason I'm sharing the story with you so you can hear what they're doing. Maybe others can follow their lead and have the same results. That is, no deaths. That's what we're looking for, no deaths. Originally, the models put out by some smart-ass white boys from up north said that maybe 1 million Americans were going to die. Then they lowered it down to maybe 250,000. Now they've lowered it down to 60,000. So far, we've had over 20,000 Americans die from it. In Vietnam, they've had 0 deaths as a result of coronavirus. I think that merits a look at exactly what they're doing over there. So let's take a look at it. Thank you, German press agency DPA, for this report. Dateline, Hanoi, Vietnam. Despite sharing a border with China, Vietnam has, with a combination of early decisive action, extensive testing, vigorous quarantining, and social unity, so far avoided the devastation seen in Europe and the U.S. With coronavirus infections in the mere hundreds, Vietnam's response to the crisis has earned praise from the World Health Organization, better known as WHO, WHO. Official statistics show there are currently more than 75,000 people in quarantine or isolation. The country has so far conducted more than 121,000 tests, from which only 260 cases were confirmed. As of yet, there have been no virus-related deaths, and infection rates remain significantly lower than in South Korea, Singapore, and even Taiwan, nations that have all been widely praised in global media for their effective responses to the pandemic. Kidong Park, the WHO's representative to Vietnam, believes the country's early response to the crisis was critical. Vietnam responded to this outbreak early and proactively. Its first risk assessment exercise was conducted in early January, soon after cases in China started being reported, Park says. The country quickly established a National Steering Committee for COVID-19 prevention and control under the auspices of the Deputy Prime Minister, who immediately implemented a national response plan, Park adds. Despite having a low number of confirmed cases, Vietnam entered nationwide lockdown on April the 1st, a far faster and more decisive response than that seen in Britain or Italy, where cases ran in the many thousands before public life was shut down. Elsewhere, governments enforced lockdowns to cope with existing epidemics. Vietnam did so to prevent an avoidable national crisis. Much of Vietnam's success can be ascribed to its social unity. Prime Minister Nguyen Van Phuc recently described Vietnam's efforts to contain the virus as the Spring General Offensive of 2020, a deliberate reference to the crucial 1968 Tet Offensive carried out by the Viet Cong during the Vietnam War. It is very interesting that the Vietnamese would associate their fight against the coronavirus with the Tet Offensive of 1968 because they were wiped out in that offensive. In just a few days, over 50,000 VC were killed. It took them years to recover from it. The only thing they won in the Tet Offensive was the PR war with Walter Cronkite, declaring that we lost when actually the Vietnamese were decimated in the Tet Offensive. I find it a little strange that they would be associating the two together. It appears that they are relating their fight against the virus with a fight in which they lost big time. But that's only my observation as a curious Vietnam veteran. He isn't the only one drawing wartime parallels. Nguyen Van Trang, an economist in Hanoi, said her parents hadn't seen such levels of compliance, discipline, and solidarity since the war. Vietnam schools have been closed since January, and mass quarantining began on March the 16th. Since then, tens of thousands of people entering the country from badly hit nations have been put into compulsory quarantine in vast military-style camps. By March the 25th, international flights ceased altogether. Looks like they still have some of their old concentration camps left over from their re-education period in 1975. Just fill them up with people in quarantine. There is no easing of these restrictions yet in sight. The vast majority of domestic flights, trains, and buses have been halted, and anyone leaving Hanoi, the epicenter of Vietnam's outbreak, is quarantined upon arrival in almost any other province. Nguyen Huy Nga, former director of the Preventative Medicine Department at Vietnam's Health Ministry, explained the nation's success in a statement on social media. Vietnam has not suffered a strong community spread so far, so the infected elderly are few, she said. Our patients are few, so we all have the facilities, medicine, and doctors to treat them. In addition, we have experience in developing disease treatment regimens, alluding to Vietnam's earlier brush with SARS, another coronavirus. Vietnam was the first nation outside of China to confirm a case of SARS back in 2003, yet it was also the first country confirmed by the WHO to have contained the outbreak. Vietnam's layered contact tracing procedure has also proven critical in battling the virus. You can do that quite easily when you have a Gestapo-like police force apparatus to check on all your citizens, which they have in Vietnam, from what I understand. Park says the first layer is the isolation and treatment at hospitals of people confirmed to have the coronavirus or people with symptoms who are suspected of having the virus. He added, anyone who has been in direct contact with a confirmed case faces mandatory quarantine. This measure even extends to their contacts, who are then also required to self-isolate. That means if you just spoke to somebody who's got it, say like at a McDonald's drive-up window, you have to be quarantined over there in Vietnam also. In a final layer, communities, streets, or buildings where cases have been confirmed are also quarantined, he said. At times, Vietnamese responses to the crisis have been severe. Official signs in Ho Chi Minh City warn that those not wearing a face mask who are found to have infected another person with a dangerous disease could face up to 12 years in prison. On March the 10th, a Vietnamese man was handed a 9-month prison sentence for aggressively refusing to wear a mask. Yet, though these strict measures have so far translated into a relatively successful outcome, it remains to be seen whether Vietnam or other nations with similar responses are able to contain the spread of the virus in the long run. We cannot make predictions, but we can say that the course of the epidemic will be determined by actions that countries, including Vietnam, are taking now, Mr. Park said. So that's what's happening over in Vietnam. On the one hand, they have a very low death rate coming from the coronavirus. But on the other hand, it's like you're living in a country ruled by the Gestapo. You can be thrown in jail for sneezing over there. You have to ask the question, do you want to have a few people die from this virus? Do you want to have freedom? It's a question we all have to face in these trying times. We want to live, but we also highly value our liberty. That's why if you are fortunate enough to live in a country where you enjoy freedom and liberty, that also carries a heavy responsibility that you treat that liberty and freedom in a responsible manner. In this case, we have to do what is necessary on our own to keep the virus from spreading and go away. If we value our freedom and liberty, we better act in a responsible way to keep it. It's going to be very interesting to see how all this turns out. You can see what Vietnam is doing. They're like on one end of the spectrum as far as dealing with this virus. As we know, the Vietnamese can be pretty tough when they decide to do so. It looks like that's what they're doing there, dealing with the virus. It's going to be very interesting to see how all this turns out. That's my opinion, and I'm sticking to it. This is Mac Payne closing out episode 1716 of the Vietnam Veteran News Podcast. Thank you so much for coming to listen to these stories. You are cordially invited to come again soon and often to listen to more that will be coming your way on this podcast, the Vietnam Veteran News.
How about that? Ain't that a mess?